1,000,000 alien soldiers landed, not one returned. The sky turned red at 4:47 in the morning, and I was already at my post because I had not slept. 19 hours awake, the signals had been building for 3 days, a pressure readings in the upper atmosphere that matched the Voth pre-invasion pattern from 31 other worlds, and nobody above my rank had believed me. Being right about something terrible is its own particular kind of loneliness. 847. 848. I was counting drop pods. They came through the upper atmosphere like teeth through paper. Each one trailing fire, each one precise, each one landing within meters of where the Voth targeting model said it would. I knew their targeting models because I had spent 3 years with their language buried in my head like a splinter that could not be reached. I had translated their survey drones. I had decoded their population assessments, their resource surveys, their classification reports. 14 months ago, I had sat in a general's office and said in the flattest and plainest language I owned that they were coming. The general had nodded in the way of a man who would file something in the right drawer and take no further action. 860. 861. The radio at my station crackled. Sergeant Owen Graves, my post commander, 20 FT behind me, his voice low and careful. Dara, talk to me. I'm counting, I said. Lord have mercy on the math. He walked up and stood beside me. Owen was a quiet man, 12 years of service, the face of someone who had stopped registering surprise at bad news somewhere around year 4. But his face was doing something new. Looking at that sky, and I gave him a moment with it before I spoke again. At least 1,000,000, I said. I've lost count of the ones I missed while translating. The actual number is higher. He didn't say anything. I put my headset on. The Voth Conquest Declaration came through at 502. On every frequency, simultaneously. Every channel, every wavelength, every satellite relay humanity had ever built. They were thorough, in 43 campaigns. Across 31 star systems, they had never needed a second attempt. They arrived, declared, and then filed paperwork with the clean efficiency of an empire that had been doing this long enough to have forms for it. I translated for Owen in real time. The declaration was ceremonial, almost musical in its formality. Reading it was like hearing someone cite a property deed. They named the planet, named its galactic coordinates, listed humanity as Category 4, which in Voth classification means organized, language capable, prestellar, manageable. They listed the projected duration of pacification, 7 weeks. They had completed it in 5 on the last world. What are they saying? Owen asked. I told him most of it. I softened 2 words. In the original Voth, those 2 words describe a Category 4 species the way municipal worker might describe clogged drain, a routine obstacle, a thing to be cleared, not an adversary to be engaged. The words are not cruel in their language, they are administrative. That made them worse. I did not tell Owen which 2 words I had changed. The pods were still falling, the red in the sky had thickened into something almost solid, and in the valley below our ridge, the first ones had made ground. I could see shapes moving out of them, even at distance, even through fire and dust in the hour before. Sunrise, you could tell the Voth were not built the way we are. They moved in formation so precise, they looked mechanical, column after column, spreading snorts outward in geometric patterns that matched their landing grid. Exactly, not a single soldier drifting from position. They had practiced this 43 times on real worlds with real populations. The practice showed. Nina Alcott dropped into the chair beside me. My signals partner, 4-year veteran, currently running on the particular energy of someone who has been awake long enough that spite has become a food group. She pulled up the intercept feed and stared at it. How's your Voth? She said. Fluent, I said. What are they saying down there? That this will be quick, I said. Nina stared at the formations in the valley. A muscle in her jaw worked. She had lost people at the Western Satellite stations 2 months ago when the Voth scout drones hit the grid. She had pulled a 12-hour repair shift after it, without eating, keeping the network alive through manual routing. She was the kind of person who carried things without discussing them. We got along for exactly that reason. Are they right? She said. I thought about the Category 4 filing and GT snorts and GT, the 7-week timeline, the 43 precedents. I thought about the intelligence brief I had written 14 months ago, the one with the accurate and comprehensive list of everything humanity had going wrong. Our infrastructure failures real, our political divisions real, our weapons a generation behind where they needed to be against a spacefaring empire very real. Every weakness documented with the clean precision of a species that had done this over and over and never been wrong. They know us pretty well, I said. Nina waited for the rest. But she said she heard it without my saying it. I looked at the drop pod still burning through the sky. I thought about the Voth grammatical system, specifically the tense structure, the way they distinguish between a world that has been conquered and a world that is being conquered. In their declaration, they had put Earth in the past tense already, filed us as done before the first boot touched ground. There's no but, I said. It was a lie, but it was one I needed. Sitting on a ridge at 5:00 in the morning, counting pods and translating my own species into someone else's administrative category. The real thought, the one I kept folded somewhere I hadn't decided what to do with yet, was simpler. They had perfect files on us. They knew everything we were. Their files could not measure what we would become once the war actually started. I kept that to myself. It would have sounded like a speech, and I do not give speeches at 5:00 in the morning when a million soldiers are landing in the valley below me. Owen's voice came on the radio. All forward posts, prepare for displacement. To secondary lines, we were pulling back. The first line was being abandoned, not overrun, not taken, just vacated, because standing on an open ridge against a million fresh soldiers in the dark is not a strategy, it is a number. I packed my kit, laptop, headset, the battered notebook I use for real-time translation work, the photograph I keep in the front pocket of my bag that I had not looked at in 4 days, because looking at it makes me think about Houston, and thinking about Houston makes me think about Amma, and Amma is 11 years old and currently believes her mother is somewhere safe. I hoisted the bag and started down the Trail, Nina fell in behind me without word. Above us the sky was still red, the last pods were coming down in long bright lines like the atmosphere itself was being written on, a signature maybe or a sentence. I thought about the closing of the Voth Conquest Declaration. Every Voth military dispatch ends the same way. Formal protocol, phrase the same on every world they had ever taken. I had memorized it in the first month of my linguistics training. This declaration's closing was different. The final phrase was one I had only ever seen in Voth mourning literature, in the ceremonial eulogies written for soldiers whose bodies would not be recovered. It means as precisely as I can render it in English, those who have gone ahead wait. We come in time. I had not heard that phrase in a conquest declaration before, not once. Not in any record from any of the 43 campaigns. I did not know why it was there. I wrote it in my notebook. I started down the hill. I did not sleep. The Voth took New Delhi in 6 hours. I was at the intercept feed when it happened, translating the commander's progress reports in real-time, feeding the output to Owen, who pushed it to the general. By the time any decision came back down that chain, New Delhi was already logged in Voth files as secured. Sao Paulo took 9 hours. Their operations were beautiful in the way that very practiced things become beautiful, like watching a machine tuned so precisely it had stopped wasting a single motion. Every Voth unit had a role, every role had a sequence, every sequence connected to the one before and after, like gears in a system that had been running without interruption for a century. They hit communication infrastructure first, then power grids, then they divided their force, half pushing through population centers, half sealing perimeters so nothing moved in or out without permission. It was the same pattern across 31 other worlds. I had read the battle records from 3 of those campaigns in the original Voth. The pattern did not vary by more than 4% across the full set. They were not improvising, they were executing a known solution to a solved problem. The 3rd week I embedded with Owens' unit, the 3rd Rapid Response, 64 people and trucks moving every 18 to 36 hours, staying out of anything the Voth had mapped and consolidated. Our job was signals. We intercepted, I translated, we passed it forward. Nina was 2 vehicles behind me. She had picked up basic Voth from listening to me work enough to flag priority intercepts before I could reach them. She had a language ear she had not known about before the war. Some people do not find what they are built for until something forces the situation. The intercepts changed in week 3. Not the content, the tone. In the first 2 weeks, Voth commander communications had the quality of professionals doing familiar work. Progress reports filed crisply. Timelines maintained, numbers logged. The verbal equivalent of checking items off a list, confident, somewhat bored. The military version of a professional who has stopped finding the work interesting. Week 3, I started hearing something new in the verb forms. The Voth language marks uncertainty. Grammatically, it is embedded in verb endings not stated directly, and it is subtle enough that the military translation algorithms being used by our signals division were not catching it. I caught it on a Tuesday morning on the 12th intercept of the day, and I sat with it for a moment before I flagged it. They were confused. Not lost, not coming apart. Professionally, functionally confused. The precise disorientation of a machine. Getting readings it was not designed to process. I flagged it in 3 separate reports. I used plain, clear language and included concrete examples with the grammatical structure explained in a footnote for the analysts who were not linguists. The general's office responded. Continue monitoring, maintain current displacement protocol. I stared at that response for a while. Nina looked over at me once. Nothing, I said. I went back to translating. On day 18, I intercepted a summary of the VOTH internal intelligence assessment for the campaign filed upward to Fleet Command, reviewing conditions on the ground against the original projections. Nina flagged it as priority before I got to it. She was getting good. I read it 3 times. It was accurate, the entire thing. Our fuel reserves correctly estimated. Our remaining satellite network capacity almost exactly right. Our projected military resupply timeline. Our civilian evacuation rate. The structural issues in the Eastern Defensive Corridor. All of it sourced, all of it documented, all of it precise. I sat with that assessment for an hour. Then I got out my personal notebook, not the translation log, and wrote a response to it, not a formal response. A private one, because some things need to be somewhere outside your own head. I wrote things the VOTH assessment does not contain. Then I made a list. How long a human being can function on 3 hours of sleep and something worth being angry about. What happens to a soldier who has already accepted they will not survive and keeps going anyway because the going has become the point? The specific kind of stubborn that in any other species would be classified as a failure of rational decision-making, but in humans appears to be structural. I stared at that last line for a while. Then I put the notebook away and went back to the intercepts. Sao Paulo was the thing nobody could explain from the outside. The VOTH had taken it by every metric. In their system, it was secured. Infrastructure down, perimeter sealed. Population centers contained, commanders. Report filed. Sao Paulo was logged as closed. Sao Paulo was not closed. Day 21, I started picking up Sao Paulo area commander communications that had a new quality, terse, stripped of everything except the essential, the language of people with no time for anything except what is directly in front of them. The city was fighting, not as a military force. There was no unified command, no coordinated strategy that matched any VOTH tactical model. It was happening by neighborhood, by block, by building. 100 separate actions with no connecting authority, none of them large enough to be classified as a military engagement. All of them together adding up to something the VOTH holding force could not absorb. The VOTH had secured Sao Paulo the way you contain a river, by building walls around it. They had not accounted for the fact that a contained river does not need a direction to keep moving. Owen read my translation summary. He was quiet. How much reinforcement are they sending in? He said. Enough to tell you they're worried, I said. He nodded slowly. A lot of soldiers going into a city that has no intention of being held. Yes, I said. He went and briefed his unit. I do not know exactly what he told them, but they came out of the briefing looking different, not better in any cheerful Sense but steadier. The look people get when someone has given them the truth, and it turns out the truth is something they can carry. On day 24, I intercepted a routine end-of-day operational log from a VOTH. Unit officer, standard filing numbers, positions, status updates in the expected format. I almost moved on to the next one. The closing phrase stopped me. Every VOTH military operational log ends the same way. I know the protocol in my sleep. This log ended with something else. The morning phrase, the one from VOTH eulogies for soldiers not expected to return. I went back through 6 days of intercepts immediately. The phrase appeared 19 times across different units, different locations, different command levels. 19 times. Embedded in routine operational documents, inserted into the closing of reports filed by soldiers who were by all standard metrics doing their jobs correctly. They were writing their own farewells into their paperwork. I wrote the most careful report of my career that evening. I explained the phrase, its origin, its usage history, what its appearance in operational documents communicated about the psychological state of the soldiers using it. I explained that in 43 campaigns this phrase had not appeared once in VOTH military communications, because in 43 campaigns it had never been warranted. Owen read it before I sent it up. "Is this good news?" he said. "I don't know yet," I said, "but it is different news." He nodded. I sent it. 3 days later, a substantial VOTH reinforcement wave arrived in Sao Paulo, rolling into a city that had already spent 3 weeks refusing to behave like a city that had been taken. I tracked it through the intercepts and ran the numbers in the back of my notebook that night. The VOTH had more than half their ground force committed to cities already officially logged as secured. Their doctrine did not call for this. In their model, a secured location freed soldiers for the next objective. Each logged location was a closed file. Finished, released, moved past. The system was built on the assumption that each completed step stayed completed. It was not staying completed. I thought about the morning phrase, appearing 19 times in 6 days. I thought about soldiers who were still filing their reports correctly, still maintaining their positions, still doing their jobs and writing their goodbyes into the paperwork because that was the only space available for it. They had come here with perfect files on us. I was starting to think they were feeling what the files had missed. Week 5, the VOTH stopped advancing. No order caused it, no directive from Fleet Command calling a halt. The advance simply stopped, the way a tide stops gradually, almost imperceptibly, until you notice that the high water mark has not moved in 3 days. I brought it to Owen at 6:00 in the morning, the translated summary of the last 48 hours of command intercepts, spread across 2 pages. He read it, he drank his coffee. Consolidating, he said. "That's what they'd say," I said. "What I'd say is they are not sure which direction to push, so they stopped pushing." He looked at the map on the wall. "How does a species that has done this 43 times get unsure of which direction to push?" "You meet something you did not model," I said. "The counteroffensive had no architect. That was the thing I kept turning over. There was no meeting where generals drew arrows on maps and unified the effort. There was no coordinating command, sending the same message to 100,000 separate groups. What happened instead was that people in basements and warehouses and salvaged communication networks across every region the Voth held started moving toward the Voth positions instead of away from them, separately, with different tools, different numbers, different reasons at different times, in different ways with no awareness that anyone else was doing the same. From inside the Voth command structure, reading through intercepts, it looked like static, disorganized resistance below the threshold of tactical response expected to resolve within 2 to 4 weeks, under sustained pacification pressure. Their doctrine called it a noise pattern. We were in week 5. The noise was not resolving. Carl Birch found me at my station on a Thursday evening and looked over my shoulder at the intercept screen. Carl was from somewhere in rural Georgia. The accent was thick enough to cut, and he had the quality of someone who had spent a great deal of time in spaces where words were not necessary. You can tell all that from listening to them talk, he said, from how they end their sentences. Mostly, I said. He thought about it, so they know. They're not going home, he said. They have stopped being sure that they are, I said. He nodded once, then he went and cleaned his rifle, which was how Carl processed hard things. On day 29, the footage from the Lena district came through. 18 people, 4 trained soldiers. One of them operating with a shoulder wound bad enough that she was working one-handed. 14 civilians who 8 weeks earlier had never held a weapon. They took a Voth forward command post against 16 trained defenders. The math did not work, not in any model where math is supposed to decide outcomes. I watched the footage 3 more times, looking for the moment where a standard behavioral model would predict a halt or a fallback, the moment where rational assessment would say stop. It never came. The first 4 went down in the opening exchange. The remaining 14 did not halt. They did not reassess. They had made their decision before going in that the math was not going to be the operational parameter, and whatever they had replaced the math with, the replacement held all the way through to the end. I went outside. Cold and gray, that particular heavy sky. Sitting just before rain, I sat on rock 20 m from the truck and counted blades of grass until my hands settled. 46, 47, 48. 12 minutes. Then I went back inside and put my headset on. Nana looked at me once carefully and went back to her feed. We were good at giving each other the space a moment needed. That night I got through to Alma. 3 minutes. The satellite window was short and the signal was routing through 3 relay stations, so there was a lag. And her voice came through in chunks. But it was her voice, and that was what mattered. She was at her aunt's place in Houston. She told me a neighborhood watch group had formed on her block, that her aunt was teaching the neighbor kids to cook so that food was properly shared, and that she herself had helped fix a generator for the family 2 doors down. She was 11 years old. She had helped fix a generator. She was proud of it. Mom, she said, are we winning? I thought about the question mark at the end of the updated Voth projection. I thought about 18 people in the Lena district who had looked at the math and kept going. I thought about Sao Paulo officially logged as pacified for 3 weeks and still fighting. Lord have mercy, baby, I said. I don't think winning is the word for what we're doing. She laughed. She thought it was a joke. I let her keep that. What I held on to afterward, what I put into the notebook rather than say to an 11-year-old who already had enough, was this: we were not winning in the way you score it, we were not dominating, we were not pushing them back in any clean, documentable fashion, we were doing something that did not have a clean name in English or in Voth. We were refusing to be finished, and a species that had never before encountered a world that refused to be finished was, from the evidence in my intercept feed, having a very significant time. The Voth High Command sent a strategic revision to all ground force commanders. On day 31, I translated it that evening. It was a good directive: stop pushing for momentum-based conquest, consolidate gains, shift to attrition-based holding operations, stop trying to win fast and start trying to win slowly. It was the right call tactically, given where they were. It was also, by my estimate, 6 weeks late, because the shift the Voth were making from fast to slow was a shift within their existing model. It assumed the model still applied. It assumed a slower version of their approach would produce the result the faster version had not. What they were actually facing had moved out of their model entirely. The distributed counterattacks were not random anymore. They were self-organizing, not through any central direction but through the natural process of groups seeing what worked in one place and adapting it for another. Faster each week, more varied, harder to predict precisely because they were not being predicted by anyone. They were emerging from the situation the way things emerge when enough people are under the same pressure for long enough. Hal Morse, our unit medic, came to me one evening with a question that surprised me. "Why don't they just leave?" he said. "They have taken enough hits. Why not cut losses and go?" I thought about how to explain it. "Because leaving means they were beaten," I said, "and they have never been beaten. In 43 campaigns they have never logged a retreat. Their entire self-concept, the story they tell themselves about who they are, is built on the fact of that unbroken record." Hal thought about it. "So they are not just fighting us," he said. "They are fighting the idea of ever having to change how they see themselves." "Yes," I said. He nodded. He had the quality of someone who understood this from a personal angle. "That is exhausting," he said. "Yes," I said. I wrote in my notebook that night after the truck was quiet. The Voth came with a doctrine built on momentum, a single forward gear. Well-engineered, powerful, effective. Across 43 applications, they had never needed a reverse. They had never had a reason to build one. The problem with a machine that has never needed to reverse is always the same problem. When the moment finally comes, you find out that wanting to move backward is not the same as being able to. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all day finally came. I listened to it hit the roof of the truck, and I thought about the morning phrase in the operational logs: an ARMA with a generator and 14 people in the Lanny district who looked at the math and kept going anyway. Then I thought about the Voth soldiers. Not the commanders, not the fleet, but the actual soldiers on the ground, doing their jobs every day in a war that had stopped matching what they had been told it would be, filing their reports, using the morning phrase, adjusting their expectations 1 degree at a time, like someone turning a dial they have never had to turn before. They had studied us, they had studied everything we were, and they had done it. Well, they just had not found a way to study what we became. I was at the Cascades negotiation. I am one of 4 people who know what actually happened there. But that comes later. Month 2 opened with the Voth command filing a threshold assessment, an internal review required by their doctrine when a campaign exceeds 100% of its projected duration. It is a formal acknowledgement that parameters have shifted and alternatives must be considered. I intercepted the filing request, translated it, and sent it up. Owen read it before I sent it. Is this good? He said. It means they are formally required to consider the possibility that their current approach will not work, I said. For the first time in 43 campaigns, that consideration is on the table. Alternatives like leaving, he said. Among others, I said. We both went back to work because 700,000 soldiers were still on the ground, and a threshold assessment does not change that number. The ground war in month 2 was different from month 1 in ways that did not appear in the numbers. The Voth still held the cities they had taken. Their supply lines were intact. Their command structure was functioning. And GT snorts. And GT, their casualty count was significantly lower than ours. On paper they were winning, but the texture of their communications had changed in ways that only showed if you had been inside their language long enough to know what it sounded like from the inside. They had stopped using the future tense. Not formally, not an official command level documents where projection language was still required, but in the operational communications, the day-to-day logs, the unit reports, the kind of language soldiers use when they are talking to each other rather than performing for the record, the future had gone quiet, where a unit commander in week 1 would write, "We will push to the eastern perimeter on the 14th, a month 2. Commander wrote, "We hold the eastern perimeter and stop there." Present tense, immediate frame, no projection forward. They had stopped assuming there was a future to project into. I flagged it in 2 reports. I kept the language as plain as I could make it. Carl Birch found me one evening while I was working through overnight intercepts. He looked over my shoulder in the quiet way he had. "They know they are not going home," he said, not a question. "They have stopped being sure that they are," I said. He thought about it, then he cleaned his rifle and went to bed, which was as much as Carl ever needed to say about a hard thing. The surrender requests began in week 7. Small ones at first, isolated units cut off from their command structure. The first came through on a Voth emergency frequency at 2:00 in the morning. I sat with it for 3 minutes before I woke. Owen, the Voth surrender protocol is formal. There is a specific phrase for it that I had found in their historical records from wars 2 centuries ago before the Unbroken Run began. It means, in the closest English I can produce, we have already mourned ourselves, we surrender. What remains? The unit was 40 soldiers, Owen confirmed the location and relayed up. Response came back, secure and hold. They were alive the next morning. I noted it, I moved on. The numbers grew. By week 8 we held over 4,000 Voth prisoners across 2 locations. They were being fed. They were not being mistreated. No one had a Formal policy beyond keep them and do not hurt them, because the situation was moving faster than planning could. Falu. I had been thinking about it since the first surrender, about what the answer to the question of what to do with them would communicate to the Voth fleet, which was still parked out there watching. I wrote a proposal over 3 days. Not because the idea was complicated, but because the language had to be exact. Both the English version I gave Owen and the Voth version I translated myself, because this was not something I was trusting to anyone else's rendering. The proposal was simple. The Voth prisoners did not go back. They stayed on Earth, alive, unharmed. Housed, the fleet could come to collect them, and it would be told politely that the only things available for collection were remains, or the fleet could accept that Earth was now where these soldiers lived. They would not be used as leverage. They would not be put in danger, but they would not be returned to an empire that would debrief them, refit them, and potentially send them back. Owen read it. He was quiet for a long time. The general is going to ask the reason, he said. Releasing them closes the war, I said. A closed war can be reopened. I want to end it. Those are not the same thing. He sent it up. 2 days later I was in a room with people whose rank made the space feel smaller than it was. I presented the proposal. I answered questions for over an hour. A woman named Beverly Asai, who worked in a department that did not have a public name, asked the question I had been preparing for. What is your assessment of the Voth response if these terms are offered? Acceptance, I said. Why? Because the alternative is returning, I said, and they have spent 2 months on this planet. They know what coming back means. The fleet command has not felt that, but the soldiers have, and the fleet will talk to the soldiers before deciding anything. You're confident, she said. I have been inside their language for 3 years, I said. I know the word they use for the kind of fear that comes from encountering something you cannot fit into your existing framework. They used it in their threshold assessment. They will use it again when they hear these terms, and when a Voth officer is genuinely afraid, they do not fight. They calculate. She made a note. The proposal was accepted with modifications I did not fully agree with, but could live with. The Corps held. Then came the situation in the Cascades. A unit of 200, the last organized Voth fighting force in the region, holding a mountain position they had defended for 3 weeks against multiple attempts to remove them. These were not broken soldiers. They were exactly the opposite. Selected, trained, deeply committed. Their commander had been using the morning phrase in his operational logs for 6 straight weeks. He knew this was the end. His entire unit knew. There is a difference between a soldier who has given up and a soldier who has accepted an outcome. The Cascades unit was the second kind, which made them in one direction more dangerous than the first, and in another direction, the one I had been thinking about for several weeks, more reachable. Nina found me when the location was confirmed. She looked at me with the question she was not going to say out loud. I'm going in, I said. Alone, she said. With a translator, unit, speaker, and mic, no weapon. She was quiet. I have spent 3 years inside their language, I said. I know what they are afraid of and what they are not. I know what they are not prepared for. What are they not prepared for? She said. I thought about it. Someone who understands them, I said, and walks in any way. Owen cleared it with the general. It took 40 minutes. I used those 40 minutes to pack what I needed, and specifically not to look at my phone, because looking at my phone meant calling Houston, and calling Houston meant losing my nerve. And I had not come this far to lose my nerve at the last step. I went in. The Cascades unit commander had the bearing of a man who had been a soldier for a very long time and had made a great deal of peace with what that meant. He looked at me the way I would later see the high commander look at me, like something he had been trying to model for months and had not quite managed. He asked me in formal Voth what I was. Not who, what. A philosophical question, a genuine one. In their experience, the representative of a side with the advantage arrives. With that advantage visible, with the weight of numbers, the certainty of control, all the reasons the other side should listen. That was how every one of their 43 campaigns had ended, the winning side arriving with everything clearly in their favor. I was one person in a room with 200 soldiers who could have ended the conversation at any point they chose. He wanted to understand what kind of thing does that. I told him, I am not writing the full exchange. Here, it was a private conversation, and some of it belongs to that room, but I will tell you what his face did when I finished. He looked like a mathematician who has spent a lifetime working inside a system and has just been shown a proof that the assumption the system was built on is not true, not broken, not defeated, just larger. The look of someone whose framework has expanded whether they wanted it to or not. He gave the order to his unit. They put their weapons down. I came out through the perimeter line, and Owen was waiting, and I shook my head slightly, and he nodded, and we said nothing else about it. Nobody asked what was said. I did not offer. That evening I walked through the space where the Cascades unit was being processed. I was not touching anything, not talking to anyone, just moving through it. I saw a Voth soldier sitting on a crate with something in his hands, a small, irregularly shaped object that he was turning over and over in his fingers without looking at it, the way you handle something you do not need to see because you know it by touch. I did not ask what it was. I started the box that night. I found a transport case in a storage pile, and I began filling it with the small objects I came across and cleared Voth positions over the following weeks. Communication devices, personal documentation, things I could not identify, small carried objects that soldiers bring across 100 light years of space because they need something familiar in their hands when the world they have landed on is strange. I carried the box with me from then on. I did not label it. I did not explain it to anyone. Some things you keep because you need the weight of them to remind you what the truth actually is. The final official count when it was compiled was 622,000 Voth soldiers remaining on Earth, spread across 43 locations, none of them going back. Some of them by that point building things not under orders, not under a program, just in the way that people with skills and time and a place to put the energy eventually start making something. Not one returned. I will tell you what that means, and it is not what it sounds like from the outside. It is not a kill count. Most of them were alive. It means that the thing 1,000,000 soldiers were sent to accomplish the conquest and administrative closure of a category 4 world was replaced before it could be finished by something that did not fit in the conquest and closure framework, something that left no clean path back to where they had started. When I first heard the number, I sat with it for a long time. Then I picked up my bag and the box inside it, and I went to work. 6 months after the last surrender, the Voth Empire parked an armada at the edge of our solar system. Not to fight, they positioned it just inside our detection range, which told me something before any communication was sent. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the meeting to come from our side, not be demanded by theirs. In 43 campaigns, they had initiated every diplomatic exchange from a position of complete control. They had never in their history asked for a meeting rather than called one. They were asking, "Beverly Osaki, call me yourself. Don't make me look bad," she said. I was the human representative. This produced an extended argument across multiple levels of government and military command that I was not present for and only heard about afterward. 3 generals and a government minister objected with entirely reasonable arguments. I was a sergeant, not a diplomat. I had no formal authority to commit humanity to anything. I had a personal history with the war that might affect my judgment. The counterargument, as Beverly later described it, was brief. She was the only person who had correctly predicted every significant Voth behavioral shift for 14 months running, and there was not a long list of alternatives. Owen had been promoted twice by then. He came as security lead, same watch he had worn at the observation post on the first morning. Gil Parrish, a compact and careful man from the legal documentation division, came to record. Vera Lund from the government attended as observer. Small group, I had pushed for that. The Voth read large delegations as a form of pressure. The meeting was on a neutral orbital station that had not been anyone's territory before the war and was still nobody's. The Voth delegation was 3 people. I recognized the high commander's rank insignia from classified files. He was older than I had expected. Species age differently, and you cannot fully prepare for how that actually looks in a person as opposed to a photograph in a file. He looked at me the way I had come to understand Voth commanders look at things. They have spent considerable time trying to model without success. We sat. He cut the opening formalities from 12 minutes to 3. He wanted to move to the substance, whatever he had been thinking about for the past 6 months. He had been patient long enough. After the compressed formalities, he said one word. In Voth philosophical register, it is the word used when a thinker has reached the edge of their existing framework and needs a new one. It does not translate simply. It sits somewhere between explain and help me understand, weighted toward the second. Owen looked at me. I said in Voth, "What is your question?" He said the word again. Then he followed it with a formal sentence I had been expecting for a long time, expecting it since the first week of the war, since the morning I heard the morning phrase in a routine operations log, since the evening I watched 18 people look at the math and keep moving anyway. He said, "How did your species not break?" Gil's pen was ready. Vera had stopped moving. Owen was looking at the table, because Owen knew me well enough to give me a moment. I sat with the question. I thought about Amma at 11 with grease on her hands from a neighbor's generator telling me about it with pride in her voice. I thought about the Lana district footage, the 11 who continued after the first 4 went down in a situation where every rational model said stop. I thought about Carl cleaning his rifle in silence, the way he processed hard things. I thought about Nina at 2:00 in the morning, headphones around her neck, flagging snorts, intercepts in a language she had taught herself by listening to someone else work. I thought about the 622,000 spread across 43 locations on Earth, some of them in the Cascades, near the place where the last unit had put its weapons down, building something, learning something in some cases, teaching something in the slow and necessary way of people who are no longer enemies but have not yet found the right word for what they have become. Some were working, some were learning languages, all of them were somewhere, and none of the places they were was the world they had come from. Not one returned. I thought about what that phrase means. When you say it slowly, it is not a boast. It does not mean they all died. Most of them did not die. It means that the thing 1,000,000 soldiers were sent to accomplish was replaced before it could be completed by something else, something that did not fit in the conquest enclosure framework, something that left no clean exit route back to the beginning. The Voth fleet had been offered the return of their soldiers through formal post-war channels, officially, properly. In writing, the fleet had taken 31 days to respond. The response was that the soldiers would stay. No elaboration. I had a theory about why, which I kept to myself. I looked at the High Commander. I said in Voth, in the grammatical register used for philosophical exchange, the register reserved for truths meant to be held and examined, rather than immediately acted on. You studied us, everything you found was accurate, your files on our weaknesses were correct, not partially, completely. He was listening with full attention. His 2 delegates were still. But you studied what we were, I said, not what we become when we are losing. I let that land. There is a thing that happens, I said, when a human being is told they have already lost, when someone puts them in the past tense before the outcome is decided. Some of them accept it, but a particular kind of human, and there are more of that kind than your models accounted for, does something else. I thought about how to say the next part. They disagree, I said, and they keep disagreeing until they physically cannot. Not because they have a strategy, not because they have calculated that disagreement is the optimal response, because being put in the past tense for that kind of person is less tolerable than any other outcome, including the one your model said was inevitable. The High Commander was very still. Your soldiers were on this planet for 8 months, I said. Some of them have been here for 6 months since the surrender. I have been talking to some of them through interpreters, not for intelligence purposes, just to understand what they experienced. Something shifted in his expression. They describe, I said, that they stopped being able to find the center of what they were fighting, not the tactical center. They understood the tactics. They mean the thing that in every other campaign, once removed, caused the resistance to collapse. The command node, the government structure, the single point of organized will whose Removal ended everything. I paused. They kept looking for hours, I said. They never found it because it is not a thing, it is a posture, it is the stance a particular kind of person takes when the world tells them they are finished. They look at that statement and they say no quietly to nobody in particular, and they keep going, not because they have a plan, because the alternative, accepting the past tense, is something they are simply not built to do. The High Commander said, "Is it transmissible?" I had not expected that question, and then I had entirely expected it. He was asking whether the quality, whatever it was, the thing he was trying to name, had moved, whether soldiers who had spent months inside it, living inside a world that ran on it, had come back carrying any part of it with them. They had not come back, that was the answer, but the question underneath the question was different, and I answered. That one. Some of the soldiers who stayed, I said carefully, have been here long enough that they are. I used the Voth word for the process of reestablishing roots after transplanting. And GT snorts. And GT, a word from their agricultural vocabulary that their philosophical texts had borrowed long ago. They have started something not by accident and not alongside humans by coincidence, alongside humans by a kind of mutual recognition. Two groups of people who have, for different reasons and through different paths, been through the process of having a world they knew and having to find out from the inside what comes next. I watched him process this. Your philosophical tradition, I said, has a word for what a people become in the process of rebuilding what was lost. I found it in your older texts. It is not used in military doctrine, but it is in the writing from your own ancient conflicts from before the unbroken run began. The word for the changed thing that emerges on the other side of a loss. He knew the word. I watched him know it. Your soldiers who are staying, I said, are inside that process with the humans who have the same process in front of them in the same places, sometimes working with the same materials toward the same ends. The room was very quiet. Vera had stopped taking notes. Owen had looked up from the table. You asked how we did not break, I said. Part of the answer is what I have described, but the full answer is something your taxonomy does not easily hold. I took a breath. For humans, I said, breaking is not a permanent condition, a broken thing in our long and not particularly gentle history becomes something. Sometimes it becomes something worth being. We have developed a great many words for that, different shapes that something takes, because we have had extensive practice with the process. The High Commander looked at me. He looked at me for a long time. Then he asked the question I had known was the real one since Beverly had first asked it 6 months earlier, in a room full of people with rank enough to make the walls feel closer. Does humanity intend to send forces to the Empire? No, I said. Why? I thought about the question mark at the end of the projection. I thought about the morning phrase in a routine operations log appearing 19 times in 6 days while soldiers filed their numbers and held their positions and wrote their farewells into paperwork. I thought about how far something travels when you put it into motion and then do not stop it. We do not need to, I said. He understood. I watched him understand. It took 3 or 4 seconds, and in those seconds, His face moved through something I had not expected to see on the face of a commander of an empire that had spent 2 centuries conquering without loss. He moved through the particular stillness of a very long certainty, coming quietly undone. Not rage, not grief, something more like the careful release of a breath held longer than lungs were designed to hold. "It," he said in the formal closing register of Voth diplomatic process, "we acknowledge receipt of these terms." I said in the same register, "We acknowledge receipt of your acknowledgement." That was the formal end. Gilly's transcript is 4 times longer than what I have described. It contains legal architecture, documented commitments, the formal language of an unprecedented situation, all of it real, all of it necessary, all of it the scaffolding that holds the outcome in place. But the outcome itself was 12 sentences. After the meeting, Owen handled the final formalities while I sat in a side room with my bag on the table in front of me. I unzipped it. I took out the box. It was heavier than its size warranted, which was something I had noticed the first week of carrying it and had never quite adjusted to. I opened it. Inside, a Voth communication device I could not activate. And GT snorts. And GT, 3 pieces of personal documentation. In Voth script, 2 objects I had never been able to identify, one flat and smooth, worn at the edges the way things are worn that have been handled often and for a long time. One that might have been a child's toy, though I could not say for certain. A small wrapped thing that I believed from the material was a ration of some kind, still sealed, still waiting. I had carried these things for 6 months without showing them to anyone. I held the smooth, worn object for a moment. I thought about the soldier I had seen in the Cascades processing area, turning something over and over, his fingers without looking at it, knowing it by touch. I thought about whether that soldier was among the 622,000, whether he was somewhere in the mountains now or in one of the other 42 locations, learning the names of things in a language he had not expected to need, building something he had not expected to build. I thought about what the high commander's face had done in those 3 or 4 seconds when the certainty came undone. I thought about a morning phrase written into a routine operations log by a soldier who was still doing his job, still showing up, still filing his numbers and saying goodbye in the only space available because the space was there and the feeling was real and there was nowhere else to put it. I thought about Amma, who would be 12 by now, who had fixed a generator, who had laughed at a non-joke because she needed her mother to be lighter than the moment was, and I had let her have that, and I did not regret it. I thought about Owen on the first morning, standing beside me on the ridge. How many, he had said. At least 1 million, I had said. 1 million soldiers, 320,000, who did not survive the fighting, 58,000, who did not survive conditions that would not have been fatal anywhere else. The Voth had ever fought cold, disease, terrain, the particular hostility of a world that had not decided to make things easy for them. And the remaining 622,000, still here, scattered across 43 locations, doing the unnameable thing that happens between people who were enemies when the fighting is over and the world has to be rebuilt and there are not enough hands. Not one returned. That is not a boast, it is not a body count, it is a description of something that happened that history does not have. A clean category for yet, something that started as a war and ended as a situation, something that the word conquest does not fit and the word victory does not fit and the word survived comes closest to, though even that is not quite right. Maybe they will find the right word. Eventually, the Voth are good with language, we are not bad at it. Ourselves. I put the smooth worn object back in the box. I place the other things back. Carefully, the way you handle things that belong to someone else. I close the box. I put it back in the bag. I zipped the bag. I picked it up. I carried it home.